There's this thing that happens when you talk to people who actually live near rivers in remote parts of the world, where they'll casually mention monster, giant, vicious fish that sound completely made up until you realize they're being dead serious. Fishermen in Cambodia pulled up what they thought was a catfish in 2022. Instead, got a 600-pound stingray with a barb the length of your forearm, which broke the world record for the largest freshwater fish. And the whole time scientists had been studying that river, they had basically been walking over the top of these things without knowing. And if you know anything about stingrays, that's a quick way to get yourself killed. In the Amazon, locals who deal with piranhas every single day will tell you straight up that the real problem is not piranhas. It's this other fish that eats piranhas and has fangs so long they poke through its own skull. And nobody bothered to mention this to the tourists because it seemed obvious. And the pattern keeps showing up throughout nature. The deeper into freshwater you go, or the more remote the location, the weirder everything gets. Which is a problem because a lot of these places only go down like 30 feet. So you don't even need to go that deep to find something that'll make you reconsider swimming entirely. Well, we're going to talk about a bunch of them, and I need to warn you now that some of this is going to sound fake, but unfortunately, it is all very real. And most of it lives in water that you could technically swim in if you made enough bad decisions. Let's start in the Congo River. It has this fish called the Goliath Tigerfish, and the first thing you need to know is that its teeth don't fit in its own mouth. Not in a cute overbite way, but in a 32 razor-sharp dagger sticking out even when the jaw's closed kind of way, and each one can be over an inch long. People who live near the Congo call it Mabenga, which translates to the dangerous fish. So right away you know that the locals are not bothering with creative names here. You know that this thing is dangerous when its name is the dangerous fish. This thing grows to about 5 feet long and weighs around 100 pounds, which honestly isn't that crazy for a fish until you factor in that it lives in rapids and would destroy most other fish without even trying. The Goliath Tigerfish doesn't just survive in fast-moving water, it actually prefers it. And it's built to hold position in currents that would send you tumbling downstream before you could process what's happening. It's got this tuna-shaped body that lets it hit speeds around 25 miles per hour, and when it decides to attack something, it doesn't test the water first. It just launches itself at fish that are nearly half its own size. Here's where things get interesting though. Aside from humans, pretty much the only thing that hunts adult Goliath tigerfish are Nile crocodiles. Even they're not exactly eager about it because those interlocking teeth aren't there for decoration. There's this story floating around about one of these fish biting a crocodile clean in half. And while nobody can actually confirm that it happened, the fact that people find it believable tells you everything. Some locals won't even swim during certain times of the year. Attacks on people do happen. They're rare enough that you're probably safe, but also common enough that someone definitely wasn't. Of course, that's the Congo, so nobody is that shocked when something wants to eat you there. Everything wants to eat you. Look, some of these fish are absolutely insane. If you enjoy learning about this type of stuff or watching this type of content, I invite you to like this video and subscribe to the channel and hit the bell button, as this is my favorite topic and I'm going to make tons of different videos on crazy different aquatic creatures across the earth. So don't miss out on anything and subscribe to the channel. Now let's go to Europe. It's not supposed to have nightmare fish. That's the whole point of Europe. It's where people go to eat cheese and look at old buildings and you know, not worry about getting attacked by aquatic creatures. Except there's this thing called the Wels Catfish, and it can grow to 10 feet long and weigh over 300 pounds, which means it's the largest freshwater fish in Europe and also means someone messed up the zoning laws. Most of them are closer to 5 feet and 100 pounds, but that is still way bigger than what you picture when someone says catfish. The Wels has this flat, wide head covered in slime, a mouth big enough to fit your whole forearm inside, and these long whisker things that help it feel around in dark water since it spends most of its time on the bottom eating whatever it can find. Fish, frogs, ducks, occasionally small dogs if it's feeling ambitious. Pretty much anything that fits will go on the menu. They can survive in terrible water quality too, which is how they ended up in so many European rivers and lakes where they were definitely not invited. And then there's the pigeon thing. In France, some Wels catfish figured out they could beach themselves on riverbanks to grab pigeons that were drinking near the edge, which is not something fish are supposed to know how to do. Someone actually was able to catch it on video, and suddenly everyone realized that these catfish were learning, adapting, and doing things that catfish in other countries weren't doing. And that is never a good sign. The whole maybe they eat people thing is probably not true, but there are old enough stories about giant catfish pulling swimmers under that nobody wants to be the one proving it right. Big scary fish, sure, but what about small scary fish? The Candiru is maybe 2 inches long, it's translucent, and it looks like it could barely hurt a goldfish, but somehow it's the most feared fish in the entire Amazon. Ask anyone who's been there what fish scares them most, and they'll say Candiru before piranhas, which seems ridiculous until you learn what it actually does. This thing is a parasite that swims up inside the gills of bigger fish, latches on with these backward pointing spines, and then just sits there drinking blood until it's full. And then there's the story about it swimming up your pee hole. Huh? Well, the hole it swims up your urethra if you pee in the water story is basically a legend at this point. There is one reported case from 1997 that people still argue about, and scientists are pretty sure Candiru aren't attracted to human urine because that's not how they hunt. They're looking for chemical signals from fish gills, not from people. So the odds of one swimming into a human are incredibly low. But low odds aren't zero odds, and just the idea is enough to make people wear protection when swimming in the Amazon, which tells you how much that image sticks in your head. What the Candiru actually does is pretty bad though. When it gets inside a fish's gill chamber, those spines lock it in place, the host can't shake it loose, and then it uses these tiny sharp teeth to rasp away at gill tissue while feeding. The fish is getting drained from the inside and can't do anything except wait for the Candiru to finish and leave. It's almost invisible in murky water, so fish don't see it coming. And locals have stories about finding fish with dozens of Candiru spines embedded in their gills after death, which means either one Candiru came back multiple times or several decided that the same fish looked like a good meal. Turns out weight class really don't matter when nothing sees you coming. But now let's move on to 2002. During this year, scientists in Cambodia caught what they thought was going to be a big catfish. Instead, pulled up a giant freshwater stingray that weighed 660 pounds. It was not in the ocean where things are supposed to get huge, but in a river, buried in the sand where people swim and fish every single day without knowing that these things are down there. This one measured over 13 feet from nose to tail, which broke the world record for the largest freshwater fish. And the whole time researchers had been looking for it, they had basically been walking right over top of them. Giant freshwater stingrays live in Southeast Asian rivers, mostly the Mekong, and they spend their time buried under the sand and mud on the bottom where they're completely invisible until something touches them. Their color is just gray-brown, it's nothing special, and their body is flat enough that even in clear water, you would probably miss one unless it was moved. What you definitely wouldn't miss is the barb on their tail, which could be a foot long and pumps venom into whatever it hits. And given that these rays can weigh as much as a refrigerator, the odds of getting stung and then pinned underwater aren't great. They eat whatever they can vacuum up from the river floor. Clams, shrimp, small fish, and they do this by settling over a spot and basically inhaling everything underneath them through a mouth on their belly. Nothing really hunts them once they're fully grown except maybe a crocodile that's feeling a bit brave. So they've been down there doing this for who knows how long without anyone noticing. The problem is that now rivers are getting dammed and fished harder, and these rays were already critically endangered before we even knew how big they could get, which means the largest ones might have been down there the whole time, and we're only finding about them right before they disappear completely. But at least you have to physically step on that in order to get hurt by it. Well, how about getting shocked? Electric eel can hit you with 860 volts, which is more than enough to knock you flat. And it does this by turning basically its entire body into a battery made of living cells that fire all at once. And just to make things worse, it's not even an eel. It's a knife fish, which doesn't really matter except it feels like false advertising when something already has this many unfair advantages. These things live in the Amazon in water that's usually too murky to see through. They don't bother with eyesight, instead just electrocute everything around them to figure out where stuff is. How nice. The eel sends out low voltage pulses constantly, reading the feedback to build a picture of what's nearby. And when it finds something it wants to eat, it cranks the voltage way up and stuns whatever fish or frog happen to be in range. The shock causes every muscle in the prey to contract at once, which paralyzes it long enough for the eel to swim over and eat it without any struggle. And this happens so fast that most fish don't even know what hit them before they're already getting swallowed. But the really fun part is that electric eels have to breathe air or they'll drown. So every 10 minutes or so they come up to the surface and gulp, which means you'll hear them before you see them if you're anywhere near one. And if something tries to grab an electric eel while it's up there breathing, say a caiman or a person who made a bad choice, the eel can actually leap out of the water and press its chin against whatever touched it, delivering shocks directly through contact and using way more voltage than it would in the water. Someone has filmed this happening before, and it turns out eels have been doing it the whole time. People just didn't think to check if fish could jump out and tase you on purpose until pretty recently. Which brings us to the first fish here that might have actually eaten someone. One of the most interesting and unique fish I have ever seen. Let's talk about the river that's between India and Nepal called the Kali. And for years, people have kept disappearing in this river under weird circumstances. They're pulled under and never found. And locals started saying that it was a giant catfish doing it, but not just any catfish, but a goonch. This thing with a huge flat head and a mouth full of tiny but sharp rasping teeth. And the theory was that it had been feeding on partially cremated bodies from funeral sites upstream and got big enough to start hunting living people. Someone actually investigated this once as a documentary and caught a goonch that was 5.5 feet long and weighed 160 pounds, and realized that if this was considered normal sized, then the stories about bigger ones suddenly didn't sound so crazy. The thing is, nobody can actually prove the goonch ate anyone. The disappearances happened, the giant catfish are definitely there, but connecting those two facts in a way that holds up is basically impossible because rivers don't really leave witnesses. What we do know is that Goonch catfish are strong enough to drag a water buffalo underwater, which someone has seen happen. And they've been documented stealing fish right off lines and attacking things way bigger than themselves when they're guarding a nest. They live in deep, fast-moving water where you can't see the bottom, and they're built to hold position in currents that would sweep a person away without even trying. Whether or not a goonch ever actually killed someone on purpose is the kind of question that probably won't get answered unless it happens again and someone's there filming. And honestly, that's almost worse than knowing for sure. The locals who live on that river treat it seriously enough that they don't swim in certain spots. And if the people who've been living there their whole lives think something's down there worth avoiding, that's probably not a risk worth testing just to prove them wrong. And speaking of teeth, let's talk about a fish that took that concept personally. Piranhas get all the press for being scary Amazon fish, which is fine, except there's this other fish down there that eats piranhas for breakfast and has fangs so long they stick up through its own skull. The Payara has two bottom teeth that grow to about 6 inches each, and because they're too big to fit anywhere normal, the upper jaw evolved special holes for them to slot into when the mouth closes, which means this fish is permanently carrying around 2 daggers that poke through its face. It's about 3 feet long, silver, and looks almost normal until you see the teeth. And then suddenly everything about it makes sense. These things live in the fastest parts of the Amazon, right before waterfalls and in rapids where most fish would just get swept away and die. But Payara are built for it and actually use the current to hunt. They'll sit in the churning water waiting for other fish to swim past, and when something comes through, they just rocket forward and impale it on those fangs before it even knows what happened. The teeth aren't for chewing, they're for holding. And once Payara has something stuck on them, it's not getting away because there's nowhere to go. They swallow prey whole after that, usually head first, and they can take down fish that are almost half their own size without much trouble. What's funny is that locals who live on the Amazon and deal with piranhas every day will tell you the Payara is worse. Which should tell you something. These fish don't travel in groups like piranhas do. They hunt alone, and they're fast enough that you won't see them coming in murky water till they've already hit whatever they were aiming for. Fishermen who hook them say they fight harder than almost anything else in the river. The whole time they're thrashing around, those fangs are going in every direction. so even catching one safely is basically a gamble on whether you keep all your fingers or not. Though if you want to talk about monster fish, let's talk about one that is truly an old monster. Alligator gar have been around for 100 million years without changing much, which means they looked at evolution and said, no thank you, we're good. These things can hit 8 feet long and weigh over 300 pounds, and they're covered in scales that are so hard that Native Americans used to make arrowheads out of them because regular bone wasn't cutting it. The name makes sense once you see one, because the head is wide and flat with a snout full of teeth that look exactly like you'd expect. The fact that it breathes air by surfacing every few minutes means you'll hear it coming up with this weird gulp sound that shouldn't belong to a fish. They live in the southern United States, mostly in slow rivers and swamps where the water's warm and muddy and full of places to hide during the day. At night they come out to hunt, and pretty much anything that swims is fair game. Other fish, birds, small mammals, whatever fits in the mouth gets eaten. Their teeth aren't sharp like a shark's, they're more like needles that point backward, so once something's in there, it's not coming back out no matter how hard it tries. Gar don't chase prey down either. They just float near the surface looking like a log until something swims too close, and then they turn sideways and grab it before it's time to react. The air-breathing thing is not something fish are really supposed to do, but gar have this swim bladder that works kind of like a lung, so they can survive in water that would kill most other fish from low oxygen. They've been doing this since before dinosaurs showed up, and apparently it's worked out fine because they're still here and the dinosaurs aren't, which feels like the ultimate long game. People used to think that they were dangerous and tried to get rid of them, but it turns out they're just minding their own business, eating stuff that nobody wanted anyway. So now we've decided that they're actually kind of fine. Alright, now let's talk about the fish with the hands down worst mouth. Lampreys have a circular mouth lined with rings of teeth that looks like something designed by someone who had never seen a mouth before and just went with their gut. They're not even fish technically, they're jawless parasites that are older than trees, and what they do is latch onto other fish and drill a hole straight through their skin using a tongue covered in more teeth. Once they're in, they'll drink blood for days or weeks while the host fish just has to deal with it. And the whole time the lamprey is pumping out this chemical that stops the wound from clotting so the blood keeps flowing no matter what. In the 1900s, lamprey got into the Great Lakes through canals that nobody thought to put screens on, and within a few decades, they had killed about 75% of the fish in there because nothing was ready for them. Lake trout that used to weigh 30 pounds were coming up covered in circular scars from lamprey attacks, and most of them died either from blood loss or infections before they could recover. Fishermen started finding trout with multiple lampreys attached at once, which meant some fish were getting drained by 3 to 4 of these things at the same time and somehow still trying to swim around like everything was fine. The mouth itself is bad enough, but knowing that a lamprey can stay attached for weeks makes it worse, because that means the fish it's been feeding on is just swimming around with this thing hanging off of its side the whole time, slowly getting weaker and hoping it detaches before something else decides to eat them both. They detect prey by sensing vibrations in the water, so they'll just be sitting on the bottom waiting for something to swim past, and then they shoot up and latch on before the fish even knows it's under attack. There's no fighting them off either, because once those teeth hook in, they're not letting go until they're full, and by then, it's usually too late for the host anyway. Now let's talk about a fish that straight up refuses to die. African lungfish can survive out of water for 3 years. That is right, not days, not months, not weeks, years. Which should not be possible, but here we are. When a pond starts drying up, the lungfish digs itself into the mud at the bottom and secretes this mucus that hardens into a cocoon around its body. And then it just waits there in what's essentially suspended animation until rain comes back. People have dug up these dried mud cocoons months later, cracked them open, poured water on them, and watched the fish inside wake up and swim away, which seems less like biology and more like some kind of curse. They live in swamps and floodplains across Africa where water comes and goes depending on the season, and most fish just die when their pond dries up, but lungfish decided that was quitting. They've got this modified swim bladder that works as a lung, so they have to surface and breathe air every 10 minutes or they'll drown. If you're on a boat in one of these swamps at night, you'll hear them coming up and gulping, which is already unsettling before you know what's making the sound. During the wet season, they hunt normally, eating fish, frogs, whatever. But once water levels drop, they burrow down and their whole metabolism slows until they're barely using any energy at all. The resurrection thing is what gets people though. Locals in some parts of Africa have known about this for generations and used to dig up lungfish during droughts either to eat them or just to see if the stories were true. And every time it worked the same way. Dried mud that's been sitting in the sun for months with what looks like a dead fish inside gets wet, and suddenly it's alive again and moving around. They're more related to us than most other fish because they're part of the group that eventually crawled onto land and became everything with legs. So in a way, they're doing this weird halfway thing where they're still a fish, but also clearly planning their exit strategy from the water entirely. And if the fact that a fish can revive itself bothered you, wait until you see this thing. The Chinese giant salamander grows up to 6 feet long, lives in cold mountain streams, and makes a sound that's been described as a crying baby. Which is why people in China call it the baby fish, and also why nobody wants to be near one at night. It's the world's largest amphibian, and it's covered in these wrinkled skin folds that make it look like it's wearing a suit that's 3 sizes too big. But those folds are actually how it breathes because it pulls oxygen straight through its skin instead of using lungs like a normal creature would. They spend most of their time hiding under rocks in fast-moving water where it's dark and cold, coming out at night to hunt fish, crustaceans, and pretty much anything else they can fit in their mouth. The eyes are tiny and basically useless, so they rely on sensing vibrations in the water to know when prey is nearby. And once they detect something, they just lunge forward and suck it in using their huge mouth. They can live for 60 years or more, which means the big ones people occasionally find have been sitting in the same stretch of river since before most of us were even born, just waiting in the dark and occasionally crying out. The sound is what makes them creepy beyond just the size and appearance. Imagine you're by a stream in rural China at night and you hear what sounds like a baby crying from the water. Most people's first instinct isn't going to be, oh, that's probably just a giant salamander. It's going to be something way worse. Local folklore has tied them to ghosts and water spirits, which makes sense when you consider that nobody really saw them during the day, and the only evidence they ever existed was this weird wailing sound coming from rivers after dark. They're critically endangered now from being overfished for food and traditional medicine, so the ones that are left are hidden in remote streams where people can't reach them as easily, which somehow makes the whole thing even more unsettling. Let's go back to more things that'll bite you on purpose. Giant wolfish live in the Amazon, and locals who deal with piranhas daily will tell you this is the one they actually worry about, which should immediately tell you where this is going. They grow up to about 4 feet long, weigh up to 90 pounds, and have this broad flat head covered in stripes with a mouthful of teeth that can crunch through bone without slowing down. During breeding season, they guard their eggs so aggressively that they'll charge at anything that comes near, including people. And unlike most fish that'll run away when you get close, these things will swim directly at you and bite. They hunt at night in murky water using vibration sensors to track prey, and they've been known to eat fish that are almost as big as they are by just grabbing them and not letting go until they're dead. The teeth are not for cutting, they're for crushing. And wolfish have enough jaw strength to bend metal fishing hooks when they bite down, which means if one decides to grab your hand or leg, you're going to need actual help getting it off. They can also breathe air when oxygen in the water drops. So during the dry season, when most fish are dying off in shrinking pools, the wolfish just gulps air at the surface and keeps going, sometimes surviving in puddles that are barely deeper than they are tall. Wolfish are solitary ambush hunters that sit perfectly still in dark water until something gets too close, and then they attack fast enough that you don't get a warning. Fishermen hate them because they'll steal hooked fish right off your line, sometimes biting through the fish and the line at the same time. If you try to unhook one, it'll thrash hard enough to break your hand if you're not careful. Let's talk about another fish that has decided that water is optional. When giant snakeheads started showing up in American pods in the early 2000s, the media called them Frankenfish and told everyone to panic, which was honestly pretty fair because these things can breathe air, walk across land to find new water, and have zero interest in dying no matter what you do to them. They're from Southeast Asia originally. They grow at about 3 feet long, and they've got this muscular body with a head that looks exactly like a snake's except it's attached to a fish. which is already breaking enough rules before you even find out they can leave the water. They hunt during the day in swamps and rivers, mostly by sitting completely still and waiting for something to swim past. And when prey shows up, they accelerate so fast it's over before the other fish knows it's in trouble. The real problem with snakeheads isn't what they eat, it's that they kill more than they can eat, sometimes doing what researchers call surplus killing sprees, where they'll just tear through a school of fish and leave most of them dead without bothering to consume them. This makes them terrible for any ecosystem they're not supposed to be in, and people kept releasing them into ponds because they bought one as a pet and then realized it was growing into a monster. During breeding season, a pair of snakeheads will clear out a spot in shallow water and guard their babies with enough aggression that they've been known to attack people who get too close, sometimes jumping out of the water and biting anyone who doesn't back off fast enough, and they can stay alive out of water for days as long as they're damp, which means that they'll slither through wet grass to reach the next pond over if their current one isn't working out. And there's videos of people finding them crossing roads during rainstorms like they're late for an appointment. Trying to get rid of them once they're established somewhere is nearly impossible because they're too tough and too determined. And honestly, at this point, it feels like they're kind of winning. At least you can still find those fish around though, actually unfortunately. But let's talk about the large-toothed sawfish. It has this 2-meter chainsaw blade sticking out of its face covered in teeth, and it can grow to 20 feet long, and used to live in rivers all over the world until we fished them into near extinction. Now they are so rare that finding one is treated like a major event, and most of what we know about them comes from old photos and the saws people hung on walls after killing them, which is pretty bleak when you think about it. They're technically rays and not sharks, but they've got this weird body plan where they're flat underneath for sitting on river bottoms, but they've also got a tail fin for actual swimming, so they ended up being good at both. The saw isn't just there for decoration either. It's covered in sensors that detect electrical signals from prey, so they'll drag it through the mud to find buried clams or crabs. If they run into a school of fish, they'll swing it side to side like they're using an actual weapon till everything's either dead or stunned enough to eat. Baby sawfish are born with their teeth covered in a gel coating so they don't saw their way out of their own mother on accident, and that coating falls off within hours of birth, which feels like a design choice that barely worked out in time. They used to swim hundreds of miles upriver into fresh water, sometimes showing up so far inland that locals didn't believe that they came from the ocean at all. The thing is, sawfish now are basically ghosts. Rivers that used to have dozens of them haven't had a confirmed sighting in decades, and entire populations disappeared before scientists even knew that they were there to study. Every once in a while, someone will catch one by accident or find a saw washed up on a beach. It's a reminder they're still out there somewhere, buried in the mud of some remote river where nobody's looking, just barely hanging on and hoping we forgot about them entirely. And those are just some of the scariest freshwater fish out there. Honestly, I think freshwater fish are more terrifying than the ocean, but let me know what you think down in the comments below. If you enjoyed watching this video, make sure to give a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any of our future uploads. Make sure to hit the hot button as well, and if you want to watch any of my future uploads, you can click the video that's on the screen right now.